I was going to do these depending on what the decision was, no matter what, if it was stay or if it was go. I, the decision finally came, 9 days after the United States lost to Uruguay in the Copa America, eliminating them from the tournament in the group stage. But a decision was finally made today as the U.S. Soccer Federation has sacked manager Gregg Berhalter after 10 months, I think, at the helm in his second stint. Finishes 44, 13, and 17 all time. Of course, that is 44 wins, 13 draws, 17 losses. 7, 1, and 6 is since being rehired. So you're basically batting at 500 right there. This is a decision I obviously a lot of people wanted after this Copa America failure, which is completely understandable. The fact that it took this long leads me to believe there were people in the Federation that wanted him to stay, and by many, I think, wanted him to stay just because it's U.S. soccer. It stays status quo most of the time. I'm somewhat shocked that this decision actually finally was made. As the days went more and more on, I figured it was more stay than it was go. And obviously now we are here and it is go, which opens up a big, large can of worms now as to where you go next. And obviously we'll get into that, but I felt like we got to do a retrospective a bit on Gregg because he came in at a time where it was awful in U.S. soccer, of course. They don't qualify for the 2018 World Cup. It sounded like Bruce Arena to U.S. soccer was staying around after not qualifying, losing in Trinidad. Obviously, Bruce Arena steps down. They go without a manager for about a year, and then Gregg Berhalter is hired the end of 2018. There's no time for games by the time he's hired. So his first games would be 2019. So he would have 2019, 2020, 2021 in the build-up and hopefully qualifying for 2022 in Qatar. And past that, hopefully doing more in that tournament. So let's take a look at that first segment of his contract, his first tenure as head coach of the United States national team. Now, 2019, I mean, it saw a lot of wins, but obviously a lot of those wins were against not great CONCACAF countries. If you look at the losses, you look at the draws, you see the bigger names there. You see a Chile, who were still good at the time, I would say. A loss to Jamaica mixed in there. I mean, it's not great, but it's not awful, I guess I would say. A Venezuela loss, that was back when Venezuela still wasn't great, so that's not good there. A loss in the Gold Cup final against Mexico, and then a loss in a friendly against Mexico just a month and a half later. And then you get a 1-1 draw to Uruguay, which obviously that is not the Uruguay team we are seeing right now that is flying at the Copa America. And then you end that year with, somewhat end, the last game of that October window, a 2-0 loss to Canada in Toronto. And I think that was really an eye-opening point because a lot of people Canada wasn't what Canada is right now at that point. And a lot of people were like, what are we doing here? We just lost 2-0 to Canada. It was, I believe, the first time we lost to them actually in Canada. I could be wrong on that fact. If I am, it was like the first loss in a long time in Canada, something along those lines. But a lot of people started raising eyebrows and be like, what's going on here? So he closes out 2019 with the revenge 4-1 win against Canada and then a 4-0 road victory against Cuba in the Cayman Islands. Now we move on to 2020. 2020 was supposed to be more of a growing period here. It was supposed to be, I believe, the Nations League was still going on. It was time to figure out that kind of stuff. You were going to face bigger competition. You face Costa Rica in February with a MLS roster built. It's not like you were getting any releases from Europe. You only get a 1-0 win against Costa Rica, which isn't awful given the circumstances, but it still wasn't great. And then a thing called COVID-19 hits, and there are basically no international matches for the rest of the year. We do get 3 of them in December, or 2 in November and 1 in December, I should say. And that December one, just like the one in February, basically an MLS roster. So the one time you actually got the full squad this year in 2020 was against Wales, which was a 0-0 draw, which they had no business in drawing that game. And then a 6-2 win over Panama in Austria. Again, 2020 was a very odd year, but it didn't give Gregg much opportunity as expected to grow. Now we move on to 2021, and this schedule is packed because you have the rescheduled Nations League final, you have Gold Cup in there, and then you start World Cup qualifying. It starts out, I mean, it was a good start. You still weren't facing anybody good, and then you go to Switzerland in May, and you lose 2-1 to the Swiss team. I think that was another alarm bells moment. Like, what are we doing here? Like, we shouldn't be losing these games, but we did anyways. We go on, win the Nations League in extra time, beat Mexico. First time Gregg beats Mexico. Then we go on, Gold Cup, beats Mexico again. And then it's starting to feel okay. I mean, it's still not great competition, but hey, we may have figured something out here. And then you get into World Cup qualifying. You only lose once, and that was in Panama, a 1-0 loss, which probably wasn't great. But you very much start to see Berhalter ball developing here. You get 1-0 games, you get 1-1 games, you get 0-0 games, all mixed in there. Sometimes you get a 2-0 game, but, I mean, they're all not great. You do have some draws in there that are thrown in that are kind of questionable, like that Jamaica one. I remember very much questioning, why are we drawing in Jamaica? Like, it's not a terrible end-of-the-world result, but it's also not great. A 1-1 home draw against Canada also wasn't great, but here we are. Then we get into 2022. We're in the heat of World Cup qualifying. Last year of Gregg's first contract, you lose 2-0 in Canada in January. There was obviously a lot of conversation regarding that one. And it was kind of, I'll say, a lackluster type finish to World Cup qualifying. I mean, you beat you draw Mexico, I should say. You beat Panama, and then you lose to Costa Rica. You end up finishing third in CONCACAF, which I believe at that point was the last second to last qualifying. It might have been last. I don't remember. But for a team of this stature, you shouldn't be finishing third in CONCACAF. You should be finishing first and maybe second. But it was a very, I mean, they got the job done, but it was a very lackluster, I would say, World Cup qualifying from Gregg Berhalter. Now, we keep moving on. You get some odd games mixed in here. You get some Nations League group stage games, which means you're not playing tough competition. But then the September window is when things start getting really serious. You're doing 2 friendlies. You're staying overseas. You're doing 1 in Germany against Japan, and you're doing 1 in Spain against Saudi Arabia. You lose 2-0 to Japan in what I still believe is one of the worst games I watched under Berhalter. That was quite awful. And then another one of those, I mean, he had a good run there. He had 3 or 4 games where it was maybe some of the worst football I ever watched. You having 0-0 draw against Saudi Arabia of all teams. And then you get into the World Cup. You have a somewhat, I won't say it was exciting, but it was an okay game against Wales. It ends up being a 1-1 draw. And then to close out your 3 games in a 4-game stretch of just awful football was that 0-0 game against England. You barely scraped by Iran to get into the round of 16, and then you just get absolutely demolished on the international stage in that round of 16 against the Netherlands. You get called out for being just, by Louis van Gaal, of just the simplest of tactics. It was nothing complicated to figure out. And that would end Gregg Berhalter's first contract. It was up until the 2022 World Cup ended. I believe the end date technically was December 31st, 2022. Then you have the whole Gio Reyna thing with Claudio, all that breakout. That was early January. Like, all signs were pointing to an extension getting signed. And then all that stuff comes out about in college, he kicked his then girlfriend. He's now his wife, or she's now his wife. You know what I meant. All that comes out that it was leaked by Gio Reyna's parents, Claudio Reyna, who of course was family friends with the Berhalters, because they played together forever, and all that. And now you got a cloud of, will Gregg Berhalter stay? U.S. Soccer says they do an investigation. I don't trust them, but they say they do an investigation. They say the investigation's complete. Gregg Berhalter's still in the running for the job. Then we got a few more months going past. Like, what are we waiting for? It was June or July. I know it was before the Gold Cup. B.J. Callahan leads the United States, wins the Nations League. We now get near the Gold Cup, and Gregg Berhalter's name starts getting thrown out for other jobs. Like, I know he was mentioned for the Copa America job in Mexico. I know he was mentioned for a job in England. I want to say it was Swansea. I could be wrong there. I know Swansea's in Wales, but I meant in the English league. And I'm starting to put the pieces together. Like, he's saying, hey, it's now or never. Or he's pushing for a bigger contract with U.S. Soccer. And believe it or not, just days later, Gregg Berhalter's back as manager of the United States national team. Now, Gregg would not manage the Gold Cup. It would still be B.J. Callahan, and Gregg would take over at the beginning of September. So we move on to his second stint as manager, much less games here. In that September window, you face off against Uzbekistan and Oman. Again, some great competition there, guys. 3-0 win against Uzbekistan and a 4-0 win against Oman. But then you get Germany coming to Connecticut. It would be a real challenge. And Berhalter completely outcoached and outclassed there. Loses 3-1. Then you face off against the Ghana team. Again, Ghana hasn't been great in recent years. You get a 4-0 win there. You get a 3-0 win against Trinidad at home. Then you lose 2-1. What a great scoreline there. 2-1, just like it was in 2017. You lose to Trinidad. Doesn't matter. You still advance on to the Nations League. You still end up winning a Nations League. But you still, again, that January window doesn't count for me because it's an MLS roster. You shouldn't really expect much from it. But you get a win against Jamaica, you get a win against Mexico, you win a Nations League. Now we get into what we just saw. 5-1 loss against Colombia in a warm-up game, a 1-1 draw against a Brazil team that turned out not to be great. And then you get to the group stage of Copa America. You get an unconvincing 2-0 win against Bolivia. You get a 2-1 loss against Panama. And then your 1-0 loss against Uruguay. And that leads you to the past 8 days of Berhalter being in limbo, it seemed. And now we're here, finally getting sacked. It feels like it's been building up, and now we've made it. What happens now is the real question. I don't know, because U.S. Soccer is going to say that, money is not an issue. Money will still 100% be an issue. U.S. Soccer can't compete with. I know it's the U.S. They don't have the funding to compete with actual big countries that care about the sport. And of course, the big name being thrown out. Let's go get Jurgen Klopp. Jurgen Klopp is not coming to the U.S. I can tell you that right now. He is not coming here. He took a break from the sport because he was tired. He's not going to jump right back into a job, even if it's a national team job. It's not happening. I think you got to look at more realistic names. Again, I don't love MLS names, but that's still very much a possibility of happening. I mentioned realistic names, so I want to pull up a list that Fox Sports' Doug McIntyre put up days before Gregg Berhalter actually got sacked, but it feels fitting now, and it's a list of 10, and I honestly, this list isn't great. You got Jurgen Klopp as number one. Makes sense. You at least got to make the call, but like I said, he's not answering. Maybe he might answer, and then you'll find out the money's not great. He's not coming. The second one, Steve Cherundolo. He is the manager currently for LAFC. He spent his whole career in Europe, Hanover. He became a legend at Hanover. I know he coached in their academy. He then went on to Las Vegas Lights in the USL Championship, now at LAFC. I don't think it would be an awful hire. There's going to be a lot of people claiming, MLS, this is going to be Gregg all over again. Cherundolo is different than Gregg, I believe. Number 3, current England manager Gareth Southgate. Now, given everything that's happened today, I don't know if Southgate takes the job. I personally think Southgate will step down no matter what at the end of Sunday. If you win, you go out on top. You leave people asking why instead of why not. If he loses, I think he still leaves. It seemed like all tournament, at least building up to this point, he said, unless I win the title, I'm most likely stepping down. I think we may even be to the point where, like I said, if they win the title, he's stepping down. I just don't see him jumping into a job that quickly, especially since Matt Crocker said he wants this filled by the September window. And that's a very short window to obviously get a new manager in. And I don't see Southgate jumping at that. Number 4 was Jim Curtin, the manager for Philadelphia Union currently. That is another MLS hire that people just cry and whine about. It's a different situation than Berhalter. I still don't think he would be a great fit for the job. You get number 5 is Patrick Vieira. I think that's a little bit more interesting. He was, of course, the coach at Lens this year, or Strasbourg. I'm sorry, he was at Strasbourg this year. He managed NYCFC in the MLS. He managed Crystal Palace. He was reportedly one of the names before they named Berhalter to his second term. Obviously, that didn't happen. He goes to Strasbourg. I don't know if you leave a club job right now in Europe. That's personally why I'm kind of ruling out a lot of people in Europe, because I don't think you want to make that move at this moment. You get to number 6, Hugo Perez. He was the manager of the El Salvador national team, I believe it was, at like up to a year ago. He played for the U.S. back in the 90s. He was a youth manager. There was a falling out, which leads me to believe he's not going to come for this job. At number 7, you have the manager for the French U23 team right now, and that is Thierry Henry. I don't think he even accepts that call, to be honest. I don't. Then at number 8, you have David Wagner. Of course, another American. He was most recently at Norwich City. I don't see it being a fit. Number 9, I laughed at this one just because of course, this is on the list. Bob Bradley, of course, the former U.S. national team manager, beat Spain in the 2009 Confederations Cup. 2010 World Cup, he led them there, lost to Ghana in extra time in the round of 16. And number 10 is Wilfred Nancy. He's the current manager of Columbus Crew. That's another name that's getting thrown around. Now, I feel like a lot of those aren't really realistic names, which leads to the point, what's U.S. Soccer going to do next? I truly have no idea. I don't know where you go from here. I truly don't think they wanted to sack Berhalter in the first place. And now we're at this point that they had to do it because the public pressure was so much that I'm sure they have a plan, but also I'm sure that they don't. Just because it's U.S. Soccer. They never do anything right. So I'm quite surprised that this actually happened. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. So as I noted, Gregg Berhalter sacked. Will be interesting to see what the U.S. does next because this is a very, very important cycle. We are 2 years away from the United States co-hosting a World Cup with Mexico and Canada in what will be the biggest moment for U.S. soccer in its country's history. So you got to go big game hunting no matter what. If you are the U.S., you got to find a win now manager. And one that was not mentioned on Doug McIntyre's list that I think can be a very realistic possibility. Hervé Renard, the current manager for the French women's national team. Now you might say, why would he do that? He took the job before World Cup 23 because the French were just in chaos. He was the manager of Saudi Arabia in the 2022 World Cup, where if you remember, they beat Argentina. That Argentina team that just, went on to win it all. He's managed Ivory Coast to a African Cup of Nations title. Zambia, he's managed in the African Cup of Nations. Two teams that he led back from the doldrums of Africa to success. I think he would be a perfect fit of a manager. Now, you might be saying, well, he's the manager of the French women's national team. He's stepping down at the end of August. So I'm just saying, kind of lines up with Matt Crocker's timeline. I don't know, but I think he would be a very interesting opportunity. He has won on the big stage. I think he would be a very good hire. I think you can, once the World Cup 26 cycle is over, depending on how much success or not success you have at that tournament, I think that's back when you go to a project manager. You need a win now manager right now. You got to find a coach who is going to instill winningness into these players because they did not have that at the end under Berhalter. I can tell you that for sure. And you're going to have to find a manager that can win now. Is that Hervé Renard? Is that a Jurgen Klopp? Again, probably. Will they answer the call? I don't know. So that is going to wrap it up for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Click like if you like this video. Click subscribe if you really liked it. I know Euro and Copa America are wrapping up, so you probably missed out on a lot of content from that, but you can still go out and check out all that stuff. We've obviously got the finals for those coming up soon, and then we'll get into the club season after that. If you're an American football fan, there's a lot of stuff coming for that too. So thank you so much for watching, and we will see you again soon for another who knows what sport episode here on the Nick Burt Sports Network.